The snow had begun to fall on Silver Creek 3 days before December arrived, and My Lin knew it would be a hard winter. She could feel it in her bones, a deep, resonating ache that spoke of storms yet to come. Standing at the frosted kitchen window of the ranch house, she watched the white blanket settle over the broken fence line that stretched toward the eastern pasture. Each post leaned like a weary soldier who had fought too long and lost. It had been 2 years since Thomas died. 2 years since a spooked stallion had thrown him, and My Lin's world had collapsed into before, and after 2 years of waking alone in a bed that felt vast and cold, of managing a ranch that demanded 2 pairs of hands with only her own, of well-meaning neighbors asking if she had thought about selling, moving to the city, or starting fresh somewhere else. But the memories didn't just live in the corners of this house, they were seeped into the soil. This land was all she had left of the life they had built together, even if holding onto it was killing her slowly, one broken fence and one sleepless night at a time. She wore a heavy woolen coat over her traditional cheongsam, the silk embroidered with fading plum blossoms, a relic of the life she had brought with her to this rugged territory. A thick red scarf was wound tightly around her neck, providing the only splash of color in a world rapidly turning gray and white. The coffee in her tin mug had gone cold. My Lin poured it down the sink and pulled the coat tighter. It had belonged to Thomas. It was too big in the shoulders, but it was warmer than her own, and sometimes, in the early morning before the sun burned away the frost, she could still catch the faint scent of tobacco and pine in the collar. The cattle needed feeding, and the hen house door had been hanging crooked for a week. There was always something that needed fixing, always something breaking faster than she could mend it. Outside, the cold bit at her cheeks. Her breath came in white clouds as she crossed the yard, her boots crunching through the inch of fresh snow. The barn loomed ahead, its red paint faded to rust in places where the wood showed through. She promised herself she would patch it in spring, the same promise she had made last spring. The cattle lowed as she approached with the hay, their dark eyes patient and trusting. She forked it over the fence, her shoulders burning with the effort. There were only 20 head left of the 40 they had once kept. She had been forced to sell the rest just to keep the bank from calling in the loan. Pride was expensive in the West, she had learned. Loneliness was even more so. By the time she finished with the chickens and checked the water troughs, breaking the surface ice with a pry bar, the sun had climbed higher, though its light was thin and weak through the heavy clouds. My Lin straightened, pressing a gloved hand to the small of her back where the ache lived these days. She was 30 years old but felt 60. That was when she saw him. A figure on horseback was coming up the long drive, moving slow and steady through the falling snow like something out of a legend. A stranger. In Silver Creek, strangers were as rare as summer snow. My Lin's hand moved instinctively to the Winchester rifle she had left leaning against the barn door. He didn't hurry. That was the first thing she noticed. The man rode like he had all the time in the world, his horse picking its way carefully through the drifts, its breath steaming in the cold air. As he drew closer, My Lin could make out the details. A dark duster coat dusted white, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and a face weathered by sun and wind. He was not young, but not old either. He existed somewhere in that hard country between youth and middle age, where hard work left its mark in the lines around the eyes. He stopped 20 feet from where she stood, one hand raised in a gesture of peace, the other resting easy on the saddle horn. The horse stamped once, shaking snow from its manet. He said, his voice carrying across the space between them, low and even, like the rumble of distant thunder. Name's Wyatt Thorne. I'm looking for the Whitmore Ranch. My Lin kept her hand near the rifle, her fingers brushing the cold steel, but she didn't lift it. You found it. He nodded slowly, as if taking that in, his eyes moving past her to the barn, the house, and the sagging fence line. She could see him cataloguing it all, reading the story of neglect and struggle written in every broken board and missing shingle. It made something hot and defensive rise in her chest, flushing her cheeks beneath the red scarf. I was told you might need a hand, he said, bringing his gaze back to her dark eyes. For the winter. Ranch work, fence mending, whatever needs doing. Told by who? Your brother-in-law, Arthur Whitmore. Said his brother's widow was running the place alone and could use help before the worst of winter set in. He paused, then added quietly, said she was too stubborn to ask for it herself. That sounded like Arthur. Well-meaning, interfering Arthur, who lived 3 towns over and thought his occasional letters and unsolicited advice made up for the fact that he had never once offered to help her keep his brother's dream alive physically. Sending a stranger felt like pity dressed up as charity, and My Lin had no use for either. I don't need help, she said, the words coming out harder than she intended, her accent clipping the vowels sharply. And I can't afford to pay hired hands. Wyatt shifted in the saddle, and for a moment, she thought he might just tip his hat and ride back the way he had come. Part of her wanted him to. Part of her, buried deep where she didn't have to acknowledge it, hoped he wouldn't. Room and board would do, he said. Bunkhouse, if you got one. Meals. I'm not particular. He glanced at the sky where the clouds hung low and heavy, pregnant with snow. Storm's coming in hard tonight. I can feel it. Hate to be caught out on the road in that. It was manipulation, gentle but clear. He was giving her an out, a way to accept help without admitting she needed it. She should resent that. Instead, she found herself considering the fence that wouldn't survive another heavy snow, the roof of the barn where the leak had started last month, and the woodpile that was half the size it should be for a winter that promised to be brutal. The bunkhouse hasn't been used in 2 years, she heard herself say. Probably needs airing out. Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth beneath his mustache. I've slept in worse. My Lin, she said, surprising herself. My name is My Lin. My Lin, he repeated, as if testing the weight of the syllables. Then he dismounted, leading his horse forward with the same unhurried grace he had ridden in with. Much obliged. She nodded toward the barn. Stall for your horse is in there. Bunkhouse is out back. I'll bring you some blankets. As he walked past her, she caught the scent of leather, sagebrush, and wood smoke, something clean and solid that reminded her of before, when the ranch had been full of life and noise and purpose. She watched him disappear into the barn, this stranger named Wyatt, who had arrived with nothing but a horse and a tired kindness in his eyes. The snow fell harder now, erasing his tracks almost as soon as he made them. The bunkhouse was worse than she remembered. My Lin stood in the doorway with an armful of heavy quilts, surveying the dust-covered cot, the cobwebs strung across the corners like lace, and the small window so grimy it barely let in light. Thomas had always meant to fix it up properly, to make it comfortable for seasonal help. Another thing left undone. She set the blankets on the cot and opened the window despite the cold, letting fresh air chase out the staleness. There was a small cast-iron wood stove in the corner, rusty but functional. She would need to bring kindling to get a fire started before nightfall. The thought exhausted her, one more task in an endless list. But she had offered him shelter, and she wouldn't have him freeze because of her pride. By the time Wyatt appeared in the doorway, she had swept the floor and wiped down the table with a rag she had found. He stood there watching her work, not speaking, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. You don't have to do that, he said finally. Place is plenty livable. She kept her back to him, scrubbing harder at a stain on the table that wouldn't budge. I'll bring wood for the stove. Meals are at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 at night. You miss them, you fend for yourself. Understood? Yes. And I expect a full day's work. The fence line needs mending before the next storm hits. The barn roof has a leak on the north side. Would need splitting. Understood. She turned then, meaning to tell him not to call her again. But the words died when she saw him properly in the thin light. He had removed his hat, and she could see his face clearly now. Strong jaw, dark hair threaded with grey at the temples, and eyes the colour of creek water in summer, a shifting, contemplative blue. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, faded white with age. He looked like a man who had known his share of hard winters, too. You can start tomorrow, she said, softer than she intended. Storm's coming in. Best to rest while you can. He nodded but didn't move from the doorway. Can I ask you something? My Lin stiffened, pulling the red scarf tighter. Depends. Why did you say yes? His voice was curious, not challenging. To me, staying. You made it clear you don't want help. It was a fair question, and she didn't have a fair answer. Or rather, she had too many answers, none of them simple. Because the fence wouldn't last. Because she was tired down to her bones. Because something in his voice had been gentle, and she had forgotten what gentleness sounded like. Because for just a moment, when he had said her name, she had felt less alone in this vast, white wilderness. The storm, she said instead. It wouldn't be Christian to turn a man out into that. If he knew she was lying, he had the grace not to say so. Well, I'm grateful anyway. She brushed past him, needing air, needing distance. At the door, she paused without turning back. There's coffee in the house if you want it. Kitchen doors open. I don't want to intrude. You're not. The words came out before she could stop them. Too honest. Too revealing. She left quickly, crossing the yard through the thickening snow, feeling his eyes on her back until she reached the house and closed the solid oak door behind her. Inside, she leaned against the wood and tried to steady her breathing. The kitchen was warm from the stove, familiar, safe. Thomas smiled at her from the photograph on the mantel, young and happy, frozen in a moment before loss had taught her what it meant to be afraid of hope. She had learned her lesson about needing people, about letting someone matter. The cost was too high, the pain too deep when they inevitably left, through death, or choice, or the simple wearing away of time. Wyatt Thorne was here for the winter. Come spring, he would move on like all drifters did. She could accept his help with the ranch, could feed him and give him shelter. But that was where it ended. Her heart had no room for anything else. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. The storm was here. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally broke, the world outside was transformed, everything buried under 2 feet of fresh powder. The sky was scrubbed clean and impossibly blue. My Lynn woke that first clear morning to the sound of an axe biting into wood, steady and rhythmic as a heartbeat. Wyatt had already been up for hours. She found him by the woodshed, his coat hung on a fence post despite the biting cold, his shirt damp with sweat as he split logs with the easy efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. The pile of split wood had doubled in size since she had last checked it. He saw her watching and paused, wiping his brow with his sleeve. Morning. You didn't have to start so early. Habit, he said, setting another log on the block. Sun's up. Work needs doing. She had brought him coffee in a thermos, more from practicality than kindness. A man worked better when he was warm. But when she handed it to him, and their fingers brushed, something electric passed between them that had nothing to do with the static of the cold. He felt it, too. She could see it in the way his blue eyes met hers and held for a moment too long. Thank you, he said quietly. She nodded and turned back toward the house, but his voice stopped her. The fence line. I was thinking I'd start there today if that suits you. Eastern pasture looks like it took the worst of the wind. I'll help. You don't need to. It's my ranch. The words came out sharper than she intended. I'm not afraid of work. Something that might have been respect crossed his face. No, my Lynn. I can see that. They worked side by side that morning, replacing rotted posts and restringing barbed wire, their breath clouding in the cold air. Wyatt worked without complaint, without unnecessary talk, and My Lynn found herself grateful for the silence. Too many people tried to fill every empty space with words, as if quiet was something to be feared. But Wyatt seemed comfortable in it, content to let the work speak for itself. Around noon, when the sun was high and bright against the snow, he straightened and studied the fence line with a critical eye. This will hold through winter. But come spring, you'll want to replace the whole north section. Wood's compromised. I know. She drove the post hole digger into the frozen ground with more force than necessary. Add it to the list. He didn't respond right away, and when she glanced over, he was watching her with that same measuring look he'd had the first day. How long you been doing this alone? 2 years. That's a long time to carry a ranch by yourself. I manage. Didn't say you didn't. He picked up his tools, moving to the next post. But managing and thriving aren't the same thing. The observation stung because it was true. She wasn't thriving. She was surviving, barely, and they both knew it. But admitting that felt like betraying Thomas, like saying his dream hadn't been worth the cost of keeping it alive. Why are you here? The question came out before she could stop it. Really? Arthur didn't just send you out of kindness. Men don't drift this far north in December looking for work unless they're running from something. Wyatt's hand stilled on the wire. For a long moment, he said nothing, and My Lin thought he might not answer at all. Then he spoke, his voice low and raspy. Had a ranch of my own once. Down in Colorado. Lost it 3 years back. Bad drought, bad decisions, bad luck. All 3-inch he hammered a staple into the post with 3 solid strikes. Been moving since then. Figured if I couldn't keep my own place alive, least I could do was help someone else keep theirs. The honesty of it hit her like a fist to the chest. Here was a man who understood loss, who knew what it meant to watch something you loved slip away despite every effort to hold on. They were the same, she and Wyatt. Both trying to outrun grief by staying in motion. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. He shrugged. Past is past. Can't change it. Can only decide what comes next. They worked until the light began to fail, the fence line stretching solid and straight behind them. As they walked back toward the house, My Lin felt something shift inside her. Some small crack in the wall she had built around herself. It wasn't much, but it was something. That evening, she invited him to eat at the kitchen table instead of taking his meal to the bunkhouse. He accepted without comment, and they ate in comfortable silence as the winter darkness pressed against the windows and the house creaked and settled around them. December settled over Silver Creek like a held breath. The days grew shorter, the cold more bitter, but the ranch began to show signs of life it hadn't seen in 2 years. Fences stood straight. The barn roof no longer leaked. The woodpile grew tall and solid. Wyatt worked from dawn until dusk, and My Lin found herself working alongside him more often than not, their movements falling into an easy rhythm that required few words. She learned things about him in pieces. Small revelations dropped like breadcrumbs between tasks. He had grown up on a ranch in Montana. His father had been a hard man, quick with criticism and slow with praise. Wyatt had left at 17, working his way across 3 states before settling in Colorado. The ranch he had lost had been his father's originally, left to him when the old man died. Some inheritances, he said quietly one afternoon, feel more like burdens than gifts. My Lin understood that better than she wanted to admit. The town began to notice Wyatt's presence, of course. In Silver Creek, nothing stayed private for long. Mrs. Higgins from the general store mentioned him when My Lin came in for supplies, her voice carefully casual as she asked about that cowboy Pastor Williams stopped by one afternoon under the pretense of checking on her before the holidays, his eyes lingering on Wyatt as he worked on the barn door. Even Arthur wrote, his letter tight with barely concealed satisfaction, asking if that fellow I sent was working out. My Lin kept her replies short and neutral. Yes, he was working out fine. No, she didn't need anything else. But the attention from town was nothing compared to what arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks before Christmas. My Lin was in the kitchen, kneading dough for Manchu buns, mixing her heritage with the Western staples, when she heard a horse approaching the drive. She looked out to see a familiar spotted mare and her stomach dropped. Samuel! Thomas's neighbor to the south and the man who had asked to buy her land 3 times in the past year. Each offer was wrapped in concern that felt more like predation. She wiped the flour from her hands and went to meet him, stepping out onto the porch. Samuel was a successful man, solid and dependable, but with eyes that always seemed to be counting coins. He had claimed to be Thomas's friend, but friendship had quickly turned to business after the funeral. My Lin, he said, touching the brim of his hat. Thought I'd stop by, see how you're holding up with this cold snap. I'm fine, Samuel. Thank you for checking. His gaze moved past her to where Wyatt had emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Samuel's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I see you've got help now. Wyatt's been helping with the ranch work. Arthur sent him. Arthur. Samuel's jaw tightened. Should have been me helping you, my Lynn. I've offered enough times. There it was. The frustration he usually kept hidden beneath his careful courtesy. You're a busy man, Samuel. You have your own ranch to run. We could combine them, he said, his voice dropping, leaning down from his saddle. I've said it before. You wouldn't have to do this alone anymore. A woman. It's not right, you out here struggling. This land is too much for you. Sell to me, or... Well, we could make an arrangement. Marriage would solve a lot of legalities. It wasn't a proposal of love, it was a merger acquisition. He was offering her security, yes. A way to stop struggling. But the cost was her independence, and the erasure of everything Thomas had built. I appreciate the offer, Samuel. Truly. But I'm not selling. And I'm not looking to marry. Because of him? Samuel nodded toward Wyatt, who was leaning against a post, ostensibly checking a saddle strap but watching them closely. Some drifter Arthur sent? You don't even know him, my Lynn. It's dangerous. I know he's helping me keep my ranch running. That's enough. Is it? Samuel straightened in his saddle, his face flushing with rejected pride. You're going to lose this place. And when you do, don't come asking for favors. He turned his horse sharply and galloped away, snow kicking up in his wake. My Lynn stood in the cold, flour still dusting her sleeves, feeling a heavy stone of guilt and fear settle in her chest. Wyatt approached slowly. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. You all right? He says I'm going to lose the place, she whispered, looking out at the white horizon. Men like that think the only strength that matters is the kind that comes from a bank account, Wyatt said, his voice low. He doesn't know you very well, does he? My Lynn looked at him, surprised. I suppose not. Well, Wyatt tipped his hat back slightly. I reckon we've got work to do if we're going to prove him wrong. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and temperatures cold enough to make the snow squeak underfoot. My Lynn had avoided thinking about the holiday for weeks. It was just another day. But the air felt different. She stayed home while the town gathered at the church. Wyatt worked through the morning as usual, checking on the cattle, breaking ice. My Lynn watched him from the kitchen window as she prepared a simple dinner. She wore her red scarf, the wool scratching softly against her neck. She turned to find Wyatt standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncertain for the first time since he'd arrived. Didn't mean to intrude, he said. Just wanted to let you know I'm saddling up. Heading into town. Town. The word came out sharper than she intended. Today? It's Christmas Eve. Stores are open until noon. I need to pick up a few things. Something cold and terrible seized her chest. He was leaving. Not just to town. Men didn't look uncertain about picking up supplies. He was leaving for good. Packing up and moving on, just like she had always known he would. Christmas Eve seemed as good a time as any for a drifter to drift. You don't have to come back, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Hard. Defensive. If you're going, just go. I've managed before. I'll manage again. Wyatt went very still. My Lynn, She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles went white. I don't need your pity. I hired you for work. You did it. We're square. You don't owe me anything. The silence stretched so long she thought he had left without another word. Then she heard his boots on the floorboards, felt him behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Look at me, he said quietly. She shook her head. My Lin, his hand touched her shoulder, gentle but firm. Look at me. She turned, and the expression on his face nearly undid her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was something deeper. I'm going to town, he said, his voice steady. To pick up a few things. I ordered a new latch for the hen house, some wire, and something else. He reached into his duster pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. The brown paper was creased, as if it had been carried for a while. This, he set it on the counter between them. For Christmas. I was going to wait until tonight to give it to you. But seems like maybe you need to know right now that I'm coming back. Her throat tightened. Wyatt. I'm not him, he said. And she knew he meant Thomas. I can't be him, and I won't try. But I'm also not leaving, My Lin. Not unless you tell me you want me to. And even then he stopped, a small smile playing on his lips. Even then, it would take some convincing. Why, she whispered. Why stay? This land is hard. The work is endless. Because this place matters, he said. Because the work matters. And because you matter. The words hung in the air, fragile and fierce. She could dismiss them. She could build the walls back up. But she looked at his face, weathered and honest, and realized she was tired of the walls. I can't lose someone again, she said. I know. His hand came up, cupping her face, his thumb brushing against her cheekbone. But you can't live afraid of loss, either. That's not living at all. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. Go, she said softly. Go to town. But you better be back for dinner. I'm making dumplings. Yes, I wouldn't miss it. Wyatt returned just as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. My Lin had set the table with her good porcelain bowls, the ones with the blue dragons that she hadn't used since before Thomas died, and lit candles that cast warm shadows across the walls. They ate slowly, the house filled with the scent of ginger and garlic and pine. When the bowls were empty, Wyatt pushed the wrapped package across the table toward her. Go on, he said. Open it. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the paper. Inside was a small, carved wooden box. She opened the lid to find a compass inside, old and brass and beautiful, the glass polished to a shine. It was my grandfather's, Wyatt said. He gave it to me when I left Montana. Said a man should always know which way he's headed, even when he's lost. I've been carrying it for 15 years. Never had anywhere I wanted to stay long enough to put it down. Until now. My Lin ran her thumb over the cool brass. She understood what he was saying. He wasn't just staying for the winter. He was choosing a direction. Choosing this place. Choosing her. Wyatt, she said, her voice catching. I know it soon, he said quickly. I know you need time. But I wanted you to have it anyway. Something to hold on to when you're not sure which way to go. My Lin closed her fingers around the compass, feeling its weight. For 2 years, she had been drifting in circles of grief, unable to see past the snow. But the needle was steady. North was north. And here, in the warm light of the kitchen, she had found her center again. Stay, she said. Not just for winter. Stay. His smile was slow and genuine, transforming his face. I believe I will. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, sharp and bright above the white expanse of the west. Inside, My Lin reached across the table and took the cowboy's hand, feeling the calluses and the warmth. The winter would still be hard. The land would still demand everything they had to give. But they would face it together. Christmas had come to Silver Creek after all. It hadn't come with fanfare or miracles, but in the quiet, steady presence of a lone rancher who had arrived with more than gifts, he had brought the possibility of a new beginning.